Hi everybody, and welcome to another One History Help video with me, Mrs. O'Neill. This video will go through the exam technique needed to compare and explain similarities. Just like the significance one that I did the other week, it's made up of my Instagram live video where I go through the theory and plan out my answer for a specific explaining two similarities question. And then it goes on to me talking through the write-up of the answer using the plans that I will have made in that earlier Instagram video. I hope you find it useful. This question features on the second paper of the GCSE History exam, which focuses in part on Britain, the health and the people. As always, with 8-mark questions like this one, you are looking to spend in the exam roughly around about 10 minutes. That works out as a minute per mark, then a few minutes to plan your answer as well. I talk about why you shouldn't be scared of planning in all of my videos where we talk about exam technique, and you'll hear about it more in the Instagram live section of this video. What comes next is the edited version of my Instagram live video, and then after the Instagram live video is finished, I actually start to do the writing up based on the plans that I have done from there.
Just to let you know that this is all for the AQA exam board, and this is looking at questions that focus on the medicine study. We call it Britain, the health and the people. It's your paper 2 exam. You have 2 exams in total. Your paper 1 is your modern world study. So if you're taught by me or taught by, in my school at the moment, that is our study on America, and also the study that you are probably just about starting at the moment, which is looking at conflict and tension. And then paper 2 is Britain, the health and the people, or medicine as we like to call it in our place. And then it's also going to be on our final topic that you guys will be looking at probably around about January next year, which is the Norman Conquest. Just as a reminder then, you have 4 exam questions for your medicine section, and as you can see, questions 1, 2 and 3 are all worth 8 marks. Now remember, because the exam comes to you in the form of a booklet with lines already prepared for you in it, you do not have to answer the questions in order. You can answer them in whatever order that you like, and the examiner will be none the wiser. With that in mind, I always strongly recommend that you should start with the largest mark question first. It gets it out of the way, because you don't want to be kind of going through them in order and thinking, oh my gosh, I've still got that massive question to do. So psychologically, it's a massive help to get that one out of the way first of all. So that's always my advice. Time-wise, 8 marks. Questions are when we should spend roughly about 10 minutes on. So that's a minute or 2 per mark, plus a minute or 2 for planning as well. And this concept of planning, like I've mentioned to you in previous videos, you know, I think it gets a bit of a bad rep because it gives the impression that you have to sit and kind of develop some kind of elaborate diagram and so on and so forth. When I say a minute or 2 for planning, what I mean is stop, think, how do I answer the question? And 2, what do I want to put in the question? Trust me, from being an examiner, especially for the medicine paper, before, you can tell when someone's actually planned what they want to say, and their answers are so much better, and it's so much easier to award them marks. Yes, shock horror, examiners are there because they want to give you marks for your answers. They do not want to penalise you. They are not looking to take marks away from you. They want to do as much as they can to give you those marks. On to our question we're going to look at today. There's already a YouTube video on the first question there about how useful a source is. That has got one video in terms of theory and planning, and then another video that goes through an actual write-up and example. The one that we did last week, which looks at explaining the significance of an individual or a discovery. And today we are going to be having a look at how you compare 2 different events, individuals and so on and so forth, but looking at similarities. So that's what we're going to be doing today. I've said similarities, and in my video last week I had similarities stroke differences, but actually from my experience and from all of the past papers and the sample papers that I've looked through, they never ask about differences. They're always asking about similarities. So that's why I'm going to think about that when I'm planning this with you today. Let's take a look at the question that we're going to be doing together. This isn't, last week I made up a question myself because I really wanted to talk about how significant William Harvey was, but this one right here, I'll give you a second or two to read it in a second once I stop talking, is actually taken from a previous exam paper from AQA. So remember, when it comes to reading the question, you've got to slow yourself down. Make sure you take in every single word. And the best way you do that is by drawing a line between each word. I'm going to do exactly that now. So, I need to stop saying so. Goodness me. Explain 2 ways in which surgery in the Middle Ages and surgery at the time of John Hunter were similar. Explain 2 ways in which surgery in the Middle Ages and surgery at the time of John Hunter were similar. Now, I'll be honest with you, when I read it like a robot like that, it's kind of difficult to take in exactly what the words mean or what I need to be doing with them, but that's what happens in the next stage. So I've broken it down and I'm going to make sure now that I'm going to be going through the key words that I need to. So first of all, I'm going to start with that first word there, explain. All right. Explain requires us to produce a peel paragraph. Point, example, explanation, link. I'll get back to actual peel paragraph structure shortly, and I'll also talk about it as well when I do the type up of the answer. The reason I haven't boxed that off completely is because actually I want to get that next word in there as well. Explain 2. So straight away I know exactly how many peel paragraphs they're expecting. 2. It tells me right there. So I need 2 peel paragraphs for this answer. Explain 2 ways in which surgery, that's clearly significant, in the Middle Ages, aka the medieval era, so right at the beginning of our study. Oops, sorry, I'm just going to shift that over to the side there. And surgery, I like that I've managed to write that so they're right up on top of each other there, that's good. So, and surgery at the time of John Hunter. Here we go. Now, I would imagine, I'm just thinking about this now, I'm pretty sure actually that this is from a sample paper and not from an actual exam. So this isn't one that students have sat yet. And if it was me and I was a student, I would be thinking, oh, it's like they're trying to throw me by comparing a time period with a person. Okay, they're trying to make me think, you don't know when John Hunter was around, but you'll be able to say, sorry, Mr. AQA exam writer person, I know exactly when John Hunter was around. He is around in the 1700s. And for the purpose of the study, that is very, very late Renaissance time. And I'm going to say early industrial. If you're taught by me and you're taught in my school, we teach John Hunter at the very end of the Renaissance study. And we start our industrial study with Edward Jenner. But he dies, John Hunter dies in 1793. That's why personally I think he fits better, because of the work he would have been doing, would fit a lot better in with the late Renaissance era as opposed to the early industrial era. But if you are taught in another school for medicine, it may well be that you've been taught slightly differently for that. So John Hunter, 1700s Renaissance. Okay, that's what I'm going to be thinking about here. So rather than trying to really overcomplicate it, I'm going to think Renaissance versus medieval. Renaissance versus medieval. And because I'm talking late Renaissance, I can talk about a lot of the developments that have already happened at the time of John Hunter were similar. Oh, I just need to grab my red pen because we're going to note now that absolutely at no point am I going to be discussing how they were different. And again, I know this from being an examiner, that as soon as you start talking about differences, or if you base your answer on the idea of how they are different, then you won't get any marks, because you're not answering what the question has asked you. They want you to talk about similarities. And actually, in this study that we're doing for medicine, similarities is actually a lot more challenging than talking about how things were different. So that's why most of the questions are based on the idea of similarity. So we want 2 peel paragraphs, essentially, about the Middle Ages and John Hunter there, and all about, let's pop it in a nice little bubble here, gone for a kind of sheepy cloud thing there, all about surgery. Now, let me grab my red pen again. I'll put it away. I'm clearly already thinking I'm not going to talk about the negatives here, but I am. What we are not looking at here with this idea of explain 2 ways in which surgery in the Middle Ages was similar to that of John Hunter. What we do not want is 1 paragraph on Hunter and then paragraph 2 on the medieval times. We do not want that whatsoever, okay? Lots of crosses. I would cross it out, but I want you to be able to see it, okay? We are not doing that. No. There we go. Right, we are not doing that. When they ask for 2 peel paragraphs, they are not looking for 1 paragraph on Hunter and 1 on the Middle Ages or vice versa, because if you did that, sorry, let me word that better. I'm going to ask you a rhetorical question. Can you understand why they don't want that? Why don't they just want you to do 1 paragraph on the surgery at the time of John Hunter and 1 paragraph on surgery at the time of the Middle Ages? Why don't they want that? Okay, give you a second or two to think about it. Okay? If you do that, you are not comparing them. You're not talking about similarities whatsoever. All right? You are just literally giving the details and that's it. It's all about the similarities. You need to give 2 ways in which they were similar. All right? Now, going back to surgery, we talk about this question here, when I looked at it and I thought when I picked that I wanted to do this question, I thought, what might a student try and do, and how can I kind of lead you elsewhere? And actually, surgery questions are, I think, actually quite useful, because one thing that surgery has in common throughout every single time period, whether you're writing about the year 1066 or you're writing about the year 2020, is that surgery always has 3 main problems. And they are the problem of pain, the problem of infection, and the problem of blood loss. Okay, that is a similarity with surgery that extends throughout the ages. So what I was thinking students might try and do is they might try and talk maybe about the types of surgery that were taking place. Maybe that was something that was going through your brain. But actually, if you do that, you'll probably come across a lot of differences instead. But we want to talk about similarities. So if you're asked about surgery, we are talking pain, infection, blood loss. All right. But have you noticed? 1, 2, 3, but we only need to write 2 peel paragraphs. So I'm going to be basing my peel paragraphs on these 3 things. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, right now, I don't know which 2 of these I actually want to discuss. I haven't quite decided. I was trying to think when I was planning this and I was putting all my little sheets together here that I'm going through with you. I was trying to think, which ones am I more strongly leaning towards? And then I decided, I'm going to decide when I've planned my answer. So if I bring across, I'm sure we'll come back to the question sheet. Pronounce that word correctly, Sean. Put that one to one side. So this is kind of like planning sheet 1 that I'm thinking of here. Pain, infection, blood loss. I will tell you now that one of these three things I will not be writing about in my answer. But can you see, I don't know how clear it is, just down the bottom, you might be able to see it there. I've got myself a little checklist down here because I need to make sure when I'm writing my paragraphs that I talk about surgery at the time of John Hunter and also in the Middle Ages as well. So that's just there as a little kind of reminder for me. Here we go. Let's grab my pen here. I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes thinking, what can I remember about the problem of pain and surgery, infection and blood loss. And I'm going to be really, really careful not to go any further ahead than the late 1700s. So I am not going to be talking about antiseptics. I'm not going to be talking about anaesthetic chemically. So I'm not going to be talking about James Simpson and chloroform because they are 100 years after the time of John Hunter. So pain and trying to stop pain is all about anaesthetics. And excuse my handwriting there, but that is pretty much how you spell anaesthetics. And I know in the Middle Ages that anaesthetics were herbal remedies. And some examples of the herbal remedies that were used were opium, and you could also have hemlock as well. And one of the issues here is that the dosage was really risky. The dosage was really risky to the point of if you are given too much, then it will lead to death, RIP. And if you're given too little, then it won't work. and it's kind of a bit of a waste of time. So yes, some of these herbs that they were working with were really, really quite potent. Opium, if you are unaware, for instance, opium is what is used to make heroin. So if you can imagine, if you're going to give someone too much opium to try and knock them out, then that's going to lead to problems there, isn't it? Another thing actually that they used to use, I'm going to put it under herbal, is they used to use alcohol. They used to make people drunk to perform surgery on them. And because of that, what ended up happening was alcohol increases your heart rate. And so because of that, the heart was pumping the blood around the body a lot quicker. And so what eventually happened was it added to the problem of blood loss in surgery. So alcohol, not the greatest thing to use. One of the other things I would say is, because I know that anaesthetics aren't going to develop properly until after John Hunter, I know that these types of anaesthetics are going to be being used at the same time. And one thing I would mention is that it made surgery really risky. And that meant it had to be done quickly. Okay, you may well have seen in your lessons the picture of the man on the operating table that's being held down by, I think, like 6 or 7 other people. And that's because without an effective anaesthetic, you are going to feel incredible amounts of pain. One of my favourite stories, and I think, did I do this recently? I forget. I've actually said this out loud recently. It must have been on one of the revision videos that I've done, but there was a guy who was having a surgery done where he was having his leg amputated up around by his thigh, and this was before any kind of proper chemical anaesthetics, so we're talking herbal anaesthetics here, and he was wriggling around so much, and they had to perform the surgery so quickly that they ended up successfully chopping off his leg, but they also chopped off his testicles as well. So surgery without any proper anaesthetic is incredibly risky and had to be done very, very quickly, which led to a lot of mistakes. Now, I know that Hunter was a war surgeon, but do you know what's amazing? If I can just bring back this question here. Here we go. They don't want to know about John Hunter specifically and surgery. They are looking around the time of John Hunter. Now, I know that in the Renaissance, the problem to do with pain had not been solved. That had not been solved. That was still an enduring problem. So it's something that is definitely going to be a commonality between both the Middle Ages and the time of John Hunter. Let's move on to think about the problem of infection. And a lot of this will be to do with blood poisoning in particular. Oh, can I just jump back and say something really quickly? You can't die from pain. Okay, it's not possible. You can't die from pain. You can die from what is causing you the pain, and usually the impact of blood loss and things like that, but you can't actually die from pain. Just thought I'd drop it in there. Blood poisoning. Now, this is the kind of thing that you wouldn't die of straight away in an operation. So you wouldn't die from infection on the operating table. It's something that would happen in the days, possibly even weeks afterwards. So blood poisoning was a big problem. And the issue is because there is no knowledge of germs. Okay, they have no idea what germs are, both in the Middle Ages and in the time of Hunter in the Renaissance as well. So people dying from surgery, death rates were really high. Okay, death rates were really, really high, especially from things because of the type of surgery that was being done. Amputations is one of the main ones. Thinking especially in terms of battlefield surgery, you get this illness, you've probably heard of it before, called gangrene, but not spelt green like the colour, even though I've actually intentionally used green for the word infection. But yes, gangrene would set in and things like that. That would lead to limbs being amputated and would have that high death rate. But I think, you know, the fact that they are completely unaware of this. Think about how operations occurred, okay? Lack of hygiene during surgery. Lack of hygiene during surgery was definitely one. The idea that people who were doing the operations, the surgeons themselves, we can talk about the fact, for instance, that they all wore their own clothes, they didn't wear gloves, they used, you know, dirty instruments, you know, like for instance, if you were chopping off someone's leg and you were amputating their leg and you found that your saw wasn't kind of cutting through their leg very well, then it was probably because your saw needed cleaning. And that's probably when they would actually clean it. Nothing like the routine hygiene that we get in surgery today. One of the things that we could possibly say with this in mind, although, I've got to be careful here because I'm leaning into a difference, is that I know that around the time of John Hunter, we get the Royal College of Surgeons. It's actually just known as the College of Surgeons at the time, which is trying to distinguish the reputation between your kind of classic barber surgeons, the ones who basically learn how to be a surgeon from another barber surgeon and just perform things like bloodletting, trying to distinguish them from the higher class of surgeon like Hunter was, in terms of people who went through not only an apprenticeship, but also some kind of university-based training on surgery as well. So I'm erring on the side of caution there. In fact, I'm going to get my red pen and I'm going to just put a couple of question marks against that, because I'm not 100% certain I want to talk about that, because essentially what I'm seeing there is a difference, and I don't want to talk too much about differences. Let's talk blood loss, okay? Now, again, in the medieval times, they are completely unaware of the problem of blood loss, because they are still holding on to Galen's belief that when your body, let me say that one more time. They are holding on to Galen's belief that your body constantly remakes blood, constantly. You never run out of blood, according to Galen. And people in the medieval times still believe that. So blood loss isn't really a problem for them knowingly in surgery. It is a problem, it is happening, but they don't understand why it is. Now, when we get to the time of Hunter, okay, we have had the work of William Harvey. He was doing his work in the 1600s. Remember, it's all about Harvey Hart. All about Harvey Hart. So Harvey is the one who finds that the heart pumps blood around the body and you only have one supply of blood. So around this time, we're starting to get surgeons, I should say, a lot more aware of the problem of blood loss, especially when we get to the time of John Hunter. We have also, in regards to the time of Hunter being around in the late 1700s, we've had the work of Ambroise Paré, that war surgeon from France who did the work on, for instance, false limbs. He also, through the factor of chance, was able to discover, or rediscover, I should say, that herbal remedy for treating gunshot wounds. But the reason I want to talk about Paré here is because he creates ligatures, these silk threads that were used to try and stop the blood loss. And I'm already starting to think, am I going too far into differences? But I also know in the back of my head, I've got a way that I can bring this around to a similarity. The ligatures, those kind of silk threads that were used to tie off the ends of blood vessels, and that was used instead of, in the medieval times and into the early Renaissance, they used a process called cauterizing, which is when they would basically, I always imagine like a soldering iron. They would basically just get like a soldering iron and like apply it. I'm trying to find my camera there. Imagine that I had like a cut there, and this is my soldering iron thingy, my red hot iron poker that's been over the fire there. They would basically apply it to the open wound, press it down, and what it would do is it would burn and seal the blood vessels accordingly. Incredibly painful. Ligatures, not painful. However, ligatures do have the problem in the Renaissance era of carrying infection into the body, because these silk threads that were used by Paré and by other surgeons after him are not sterilized. No idea about germs at this time, so why would they? So I'm trying to think, is there anything else in regards to blood loss? I could say about high death rate again here as well. That is the kind of thing you would die from on the operating table. This is when people are dying in surgery, is generally through blood loss. If you're dying on the operating table, it's because you've lost too much blood. But generally speaking, there is a lack of awareness surrounding that. So let me have a think. I've now got to decide which of these two I want to actually write about in my answer. And you know what? I think I'm going to go with pain, and I'm going to go with blood loss as well. And the reason is because I want to talk too much about differences to an extent here. And I think just by discussing these two, I can feel when I was talking it through, I was a lot more firmly based on the concept of those similarities. So yeah, that's going to help. I may well come back to this. I've got one more planning sheet to do, and it's one that if you're taught by me, I'm hoping you're going to recognise. It's my little kind of rough diagram of it to help us produce our peel paragraphs. Recognise one of these? Yeah, we love these. These are our peel paragraphs. You start on the inside and you work your way out. So the question is in the middle. Let's just remind ourselves of the question as if you could have forgotten. Here we go. Explain 2 ways in which surgery in the Middle Ages and surgery at the time of John Hunter were similar. Not different, but similar. All right. Now, rather than me producing one paragraph about Hunter and one about the medieval times, or the time of Hunter and the medieval times, I have focused on what was similar in regards to surgery. And already, by structuring my answers in that way, my answer is so much stronger. Now, I've just remembered something that I wanted to do. Do you think I can find my paper? Where have I put it? And of course I put it under the stack of all of these bits and bobs here. What can I use? What have I got to hand? I'll use this, I think. Do excuse me, everybody. Just going to grab another piece of paper because I've remembered a nice other visual that I just wanted to go through. Here we go. Before I get to my circle diagram, which is another way that we can help how to write a peel paragraph. Okay. Point, example, explanation, link. All right. Let's use the visual metaphor of an hourglass. All right. And again, if you're taught by me or you're taught by someone in my school, this may well have been explained to you before. I'm a terrible artist, but I'm all right with that because I'm very good at many, many other things. So I'm just going to draw a very basic hourglass shape here now. Ta-da! Basic. And we're going to use the concept of an hourglass to help us understand why our peel paragraphs are constructed in the way that they are, so to speak. So the top of our hourglass here, this represents the point sentence. Now notice it is nice and broad. Okay, it's very wide. I'm going to even use the word general. Ooh, she says. There we go. It's very wide. It's very general. Okay, it broadens out like the top of the hourglass. For example, a point sentence that I can use in my upcoming answer could be one similarity between surgery at the time of Hunter and surgery at the time of, in the Middle Ages is to do with the problem of pain. Okay, boom, nice and broad, pain, done. Then this central bit right here, where it gets very narrow, is where we are talking about our examples, where we need to be specific. Okay, we're giving our specific examples. Okay, we're really, really narrowing in. And boys and girls, we know it. What 4 things make up specific historical knowledge? Give you a chance to say it. Yeah, that's right. Dates, names, facts and terms. Dates, names, facts and terms. All right. So broaden out, be general, then get specific with your examples. Okay. So let me talk to you about a way that this wouldn't work. I'm trying to think now. Maybe I might go to, yeah, okay, maybe I might say one similarity between surgery at the time of Hunter and in the medieval times is that they were both unaware of the problem of germs, so lots of people died from infection, for example. Well, what am I going to talk about there? I've already said everything in that top sentence. You might think, well, isn't that nice and efficient? No, it's not. It's showing that you're being too narrow in your focus and you need to broaden out. Whereas if I say, one of the similarities between surgery, blah, 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 was the problem with pain, for example. And this is where I can start to get specific from there. Then you notice with our hourglass, we broaden out again at the end with our explanation. Okay, so nice and broad, nice and general. Okay, nice and broad, nice and general. Oh, sorry, I'm moving it to one side there. And then, if you think about using an hourglass, you've had the sand run all the way down to the bottom, it's run out, but you want to use it again. What do? You flip it over, and that is your link sentence. Now, I will let you know that in this answer, if I bring this back, I've used the same colours again, green, orange, red and blue. So green for our point sentence, orange for our examples, red for explanations and blue for our link. You will notice on this diagram, there is no blue. Okay, there's no blue, and that is because, technically speaking, in an 8-mark question, you don't need the link. Okay, you don't need it. The links are more powerful in your large questions like your factors questions because it's where you can use extent language. If you do chuck them in there, then don't worry about it. You're not going to be marked down or anything like that for using a link sentence. But I just want you to be aware that that is why you won't find one on this diagram here that I'm going to talk through, because you don't really need one for an 8-mark question. But feel free, if you do want to use one, you won't be penalised for it. So I quite like that. That's quite clear and quite distinct. So I might keep that. And I was going to say put it up on my wall, but I don't need it. But maybe one day when I'm allowed back in a classroom, I'll do that then. So I told you, didn't I? We're going to do pain for one, and we're going to do blood loss for the other. Again, hopefully you recognise these. Okay. And what you'll notice, I'm hoping you can see it kind of clearly, is that we've got a gap for something from the Middle Ages and a gap for something around the time of Hunter, because trust me, they will be looking for you to be able to refer to both. Okay, they'll be looking for you to refer to both of them. So I'm going to, you won't be able to see this while I'm filling this in, but this is the main thing that I want to be using. So here we go. One of the things that I would mention first of all here is about the Middle Ages using those herbal anaesthetics. Look how big I'm making these points, by the way. Look how big I'm making them. All right, herbal anaesthetics. Remember, we want to be nice and specific, so we can use things like opium. We can say about hemlock as well. All right, notice how big I'm making it. I'm thinking about my plan. I've not got time in the exam to sit and write out really, really teeny tiny writing and things like that when I'm doing my plan. This is the kind of thing I would literally just scribble out. Okay, so the idea of using herbal anaesthetics and so on and so forth, I would mention here. I would talk about the fact that even in the time of John Hunter, we've still got the problem of the dosage being really risky. And I'll say too much versus too little. Again, remember, when this is put up on YouTube, I will actually have sat and I will have written all of this out. So you'll see how I'm going to flesh this out with some specific knowledge once I put the plan into writing. So I've got the dosage, too much and too little, herbal anaesthetics, so on and so forth. I'm just looking back at my notes here. I could talk about, I might even chuck alcohol into the bit of the time of Hunter there, because I know more alcohol is being made at that time than it is in the medieval times. Okay, so when I'm thinking about the explanation, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be kind of drawing the similarities together. And again, I'm going to go back to what I've been saying on here. For instance, I would say that the problem of pain made surgery very risky. Again, using my words from before, it led to a lot of mistakes as well, due to patient moving around. And I would also mention here that I do have historical knowledge that extends beyond the time of John Hunter, and this is where I would just name drop James Simpson and his discovery of chloroform in the industrial era. If you're thinking, hang on, Mrs. O'Neill, you said earlier on, we're not going to be talking about these guys. Yeah, you're right. I did say that. And I'm not going back on what I said, but I'm literally just going to be name dropping. All right. It's not going to be the focus of my answer. The reason I said before, we're not going to be talking about Simpson and we're not going to be talking about Lister, for instance, for antiseptics and infection, is because I wanted to make sure I was focusing on the time periods I was given in the question. But I can still name drop them in. By the time I'm doing the exam, I've learned about all of these people, so I can still name drop them in. Right. Again, look how little detail I've put in here, because I've done most of my thinking here. All right. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, I won't have time in an exam to do this. You're right, you won't, but you have got the time to sit and think it out. If I actually just sat and listed it out rather than stood up here and talked to you and wrote it all out, I'd be able to do it in a fraction of the time. So although I'm demonstrating this to you physically, this is the kind of thing you can do in your brain in the space of a couple of minutes when it comes to sitting the actual exam, actual answer. Do forgive me, I'm just going to lower the blind just here. And I'm hoping that will stop a little bit of the glare. Ah, that's better, isn't it? Probably should have done that earlier on, never mind. I've got to say, it's really annoying how this always goes in and out of focus as well. I'm hoping that will go back into focus in a second. Hopefully. Okay. Right, what am I doing? Blood loss. Okay. I would mention that in the medieval period that they are completely unaware of the problem of blood loss, and I would name drop old Galen in there again as well to do with his beliefs about the flow of blood. Oh yeah, this really isn't focusing on here very well at all, is it? Hopefully when I write in red you'll be able to see it a bit clearer. That's frustrating though, isn't it? Oh, have I made it better or worse? Oh, a little bit better. And then I would talk here in this section on Hunter. I'm still acknowledging that the problem of blood loss is still a problem, but I can again name drop into about the work of Harvey. That is going to help with improving awareness surrounding that. And I would also name drop Paré in there and his work on ligatures as well. Oh, I would talk about cauterizing. Okay, cauterizing I would talk on here. Nope, nothing else in there. Again, you're noticing I'm trying to pick up the pace a little bit here now because I'm bringing all my ideas together. I'm getting excited. I'm getting ready to write my answer. So how would I bring all of these similarities together? I would talk about the fact there is a high death rate in surgery thanks to blood loss. It's one of the things that has a kind of immediate, oh, my nemesis word, immediate. Oh, God, I hope that's how you spell immediate. It has an immediate consequence. So, for instance, someone dies on the table, and that is something that hasn't changed in the space of what? Middle Ages. We're looking at, let's say, earliest 1000s up to the 1700s. So in the space of 700 years, this still hasn't changed and won't be changed. And again, I'm going to name drop here to an extent. It won't be changed until we get better understanding about blood transfusions, which happens during World War I and World War II. And I could mention here potentially about blood groups and storage of blood as well for that. Again, literally a name drop. Okay, literally a name drop. I'm recognizing it's still a similarity in the space of 700 years. This problem hasn't been solved, and actually it won't be solved for quite some time. Like I said, I haven't got any link sentences in there. I could possibly include one, but you don't have to have one. You don't have to have one in there at all. So let's go back through. Now that I've finished doing all of my bits and bobs, let's just talk back through the pieces of paper I've gone through with you today. 4 questions on your medicine exam. You don't have to answer them in order. I've listed them to you in order, and I would always recommend starting with the largest mark question first because it gets it out of the way. Because I promise you, it will be playing on your mind if you left it until and answering the other 3 questions first. I promise you, get it done first. Not only does it get it out of the way, but also it's a really good way to get you kind of in the room, in the exam hall, because it gives you a chance to really sink your teeth into an answer as well. How useful is Source A? It's already on YouTube. The significance question is one that I discussed with you guys last week and is also on YouTube. Here is the question we've been looking at today, which is explain 2 similarities. It could be asking you about 2 differences, and if it does, you just follow exactly the same procedure, exactly the same as what I've done today, just making sure that you acknowledge both of the 2 things that you are being asked to compare. So let's say, for instance, you were asked the question, explain 2 ways that surgery in the Middle Ages was different to surgery in the 20th century. You'd need to talk about surgery in the Middle Ages and then talk about surgery in the 20th century. But like I've said, I have not seen an example that looks at differences anywhere. So that's why we looked at similarities. Here's the question we looked at. The first thing we did was drawing those lines in between each of those words to make sure we slowed our reading down, to make sure that we read every single word. And then we picked out the bits that were important. Explanation requires a peel paragraph, and it already tells us how many peel paragraphs we need. 2. Explain 2 ways. We notice that they're talking about surgery. And when we talk about surgery, you could focus on the types of surgery that were done, but I think I personally would struggle to write a lot about that. I think I'd struggle to talk about many examples and also to provide decent explanations for that. So I noticed, and I discussed with you, how a commonality, a similarity in surgery across the ages is the problem of pain, infection, and blood loss. We've picked out the two time periods, the medieval era, the Middle Ages, and then the time of John Hunter. All right. And again, by giving you a person, it's almost like they're trying to, well, I don't like to talk about it this way, but it's almost like they're trying to throw you off the scent, but you're brighter than that. And you will be prepared, and you will know that Hunter is in the 1700s, which is the late Renaissance era, early industrial era. And also it's asking about the time of John Hunter. So it's not asking about Hunter specifically. They're just name dropping him in there. So you've got a kind of time period. And we're looking at similarities, no differences. Okay, you don't get any marks for differences. And if your whole answer was based on how things were different, then you'd get 0. Going back then to the 3 problems, that's what we based our ideas on when we were coming up with which of the 2 paragraphs, which of these are going to form my 2 paragraphs. And when we went through the information, I realized at the end that when I was talking about the problem with infection, although there were similarities, don't get me wrong, I was more leaning to wanting to talk about the differences, whereas with the other 2, I was quite content on talking about the similarities. Then we actually put the Peel paragraph together. Let me just bring this one back for a second. Okay, remember we looked at it in terms of the hourglass, broaden out for your point sentence, be nice and specific with your examples, broaden out for your explanation, link it back when you move on to your next paragraph. If you want to, you don't have to include a linked sentence. Then we brought all of this together into our diagram, starting in the middle, working our way out, making sure that I've acknowledged the Middle Ages and the time of John Hunter in both of them, making sure that I have been nice and general with my explanations, and name dropped into the future as well.
Okay, so you've just watched me do the Instagram TV video where I went through the theory and have planned out my answer. Now you're going to watch me actually type up my answer. Now forgive me, I've got my doors open like in my kitchen and everything where I'm sat typing this, and where I live there are loads of dogs, so if you hear dogs barking in the background, that's what it is. I haven't like moved into a kennel or anything like that. I'm going to have a timer on as well so that I can actually time myself with what I'm doing. Again, ideally, I'm looking at around 10 minutes, but I'm more interested here on getting it right as opposed to getting it in time. Once I'm finished, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to take a look at the mark scheme, and I'm going to talk about a few other bits and bobs that they put in there that you could have possibly talked about. Right. Here we go. Oh, timer, let's start that now. And again, writing in those Peel paragraphs. Explain 2 ways in which surgery in the Middle Ages and surgery at the time of John Hunter were similar. And I'm going to talk about pain in one paragraph and blood loss in another. So here we go. One way that surgery in the Middle Ages and surgery at, there we go, the time of John Hunter were similar was to do with the fact that the problem of pain in surgery hadn't been completely solved. For example, in the Middle Ages, it was normal for surgeons, oh my goodness, I'm sorry for all the typos, for surgeons to use herbal remedies for anaesthetics, such as opium and, oh, opium doesn't need a capital O, excuse me, sorry everyone, opium and hemlock. These herbal anaesthetics were also used at the time of John Hunter, as was alcohol. The use of herbal anaesthetics and alcohol were carried significant risk to the patient. For the patient, the use of herbal anaesthetics carried significant risk. We'll do to the patient and see what if it comes up and says, no, you could word this differently. Risk to the patient, because with the
herbal anaesthetics, especially opium, if a patient was given too much, then they would die. And similarly, full stop, yeah. Similarly, if they were not given enough, then the anaesthetic would prove to be ineffective. With alcohol, when alcohol was used as an anaesthetic, I'll talk about the heart, don't I? When alcohol was used by an anaesthetic, it worsened the problem of blood loss in surgery due to alcohol increasing the patient's heart rate. These similarities meant that surgery during the Middle Ages and the later Renaissance era was incredibly risky for the surgeon to perform, and potentially fatal for, oh no, I can't say fatal because you can't die from pain, and potentially dangerous for the patient. A lack of anaesthetic in both eras, a lack of effective anaesthetic, because I can't say they didn't have any, because they do have some, they're just not particularly good, in both eras meant that surgery was performed quickly and often with mistakes. This would not be improved until James Simpson discovers chloroform, chloroform. There it is. There we go. Does chloroform as an effective, I'm going to use the word again, chemical anaesthetic in the, I can't remember the date exactly, so I'm going to say 1840s. I'm pretty confident it's in the 40s because I know it was before Lister's work, which was in the 60s. So in the 1840s. Cool. Brilliant. Next paragraph, please. Actually, no, let me just read that first. One way that surgery in the Middle Ages and surgery at the time of John Hunter was similar was to do with the fact that the problem of pain in surgery hadn't been completely solved. For example, in the Middle Ages, it was normal for surgeons to use herbal remedies for anaesthetics, such as opium and hemlock. These herbal anaesthetics were also used at the time of John Hunter, as was alcohol. The use of herbal anaesthetics and alcohol carried significant risks to the patient because with the herbal anaesthetics, especially opium, if a patient was given too much, then they would die. Similarly, if they were not given enough, then the anaesthetic would prove to be ineffective. When alcohol was used as an anaesthetic, it worsened the problem of blood loss in surgery due to alcohol increasing the patient's heart rate. However, no, I was going to mention about being unaware of blood problems, but that means I would repeat myself in the blood loss paragraph, so I'm not going to mention it. These similarities meant that surgery during the Middle Ages and the later Renaissance era was incredibly risky for the surgeon to perform and potentially dangerous for the patient. A lack of effective anaesthetic in both eras meant that surgery was performed quickly and often with mistakes. This would not be improved until James Simpson discovered chloroform as an effective chemical anaesthetic in the 1840s. Let me just have a quick look and change. Had not the patient, if a patient were given too much. Similarly, patient's heart rate. There we go. Right, next paragraph, ready now. Another way that surgery in the Middle Ages and at the time of John Hunter, were similar was to do with the problem of blood loss in surgery. For example, in the Middle Ages, Galen's theory about the blood supply in the body never running out was widely believed. And thanks to, let's add a bit of religious sprinkling in here, thanks to the control of the church, remained unchallenged at this time. This meant that blood loss was not seen as the significant problem that it actually was. I don't like that sentence too much, but maybe I'll change it when I read through the paragraph when I'm done. For example, in the Middle Age, this meant that blood loss was not seen as the significant problem that it actually was. In the time of Hunter, by the time Hunter is doing his work into surgery, William Harvey has made his discoveries about the heart and our blood supply, which proved Galen wrong. However, before I start talking about differences, it took a long time for Harvey's ideas to be widely accepted. I've kind of gone in between my paragraphs here because I want to talk about cauterizing and then I want to talk about pare. Despite the problem of blood loss not being seen as significant, surgeons still attempted to prevent a patient, let's keep it medical, a patient from losing too much blood. In the Middle Ages, cauterizing was a popular method used to stem the blood flow by burning the blood vessels together. I want to say in a painful procedure. In the Middle Ages, cauterizing was a popular yet painful method. Painful method used to stem the blood flow by burning the blood vessels together, burning the blood vessels with a hot iron. This had progressed by the time of Hunter, thanks to Pare's discovery of ligatures, which would tie blood vessels together in a much less painful procedure. Painful procedure. However, these ligatures were not sterile and so carried a significant risk of infection, just like in the Middle Ages. Notice how I'm kind of ping-ponging between them. Let's go into our explanation. Here we go. These similarities show that despite nearly 700 years passing from the beginning of the Middle Ages to the time of John Hunter, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that basically things haven't moved forward. These similarities show that despite nearly 700 years passing from the beginning of the Middle Ages to the time of John Hunter, the problem of blood loss had not been effectively solved, and meant that it was responsible for the high death rate amongst surgery patients, amongst patients, I'm going to say amongst patients, and it meant it was highly responsible. Yeah, I got to say highly responsible because I can't say it's the only reason. Death rate amongst patients receiving surgery. The issue regarding blood loss would not be effectively solved. I keep using the word effectively. Successfully solved. Let's change it up a bit. Successfully solved until the First and Second World Wars, with the development of blood transfusions, blood groups, and effective, I keep using the word effective, and I can't think of another one, effective blood storage. Right, let's read that paragraph again. Or I'm just going to do a quick time check. Oh, lordy, that was long. That's 14 minutes. Goodness me. Another way that surgery in the Middle Ages and at the time of John Hunter was similar was to do with the problem of blood loss in surgery. For example, in the Middle Ages, Galen's theory about the blood supply in the body never running out was widely believed, and thanks to the control of the church, remained unchallenged at this time. This meant that blood loss was not seen as a significant problem. There we go. By the time Hunter is doing his work into surgery, William Harvey has made his discoveries about the heart and our blood supply, which proved Galen wrong. However, it took a long time for Harvey's ideas to be widely accepted. Despite the problem of blood loss not being seen as significant, surgeons still attempted to prevent a patient from losing too much blood. In the Middle Ages, cauterizing was a popular yet painful method used to stem the blood flow by burning the blood vessels with a hot iron. This had progressed by the time of Hunter thanks to Parry's discovery of ligatures, which would tie blood vessels together in a much less painful procedure. However, these ligatures were not sterile and so carried a significant risk of infection, just like in the Middle Ages. These similarities show that despite nearly 700 years passing from the beginning of the Middle Ages to the time of John Hunter, the problem with blood loss had not been solved effectively, and meant that it was highly responsible for the high death rate, amongst patients receiving surgery. The issue regarding blood loss would not be successfully solved until the First and Second World Wars, with the development of blood transfusions, blood groups, and effective blood storage. Cool. Quite like that. Well, let me just change despite the problem of blood loss not being as significant. No, not being seen as significant, was a popular, yet painful method. Cool. Right. So that's my answer done. I'm pretty happy with that. So let me I think hopefully this should stay on, but I don't believe you're going to be able to see the mark scheme. So I'm just going to read out some of the other bits that the mark scheme mentioned. Just so you know, mark schemes are given to history examiners as a guide. If you include something in your answer that isn't in the mark scheme, it doesn't mean that you're wrong, and most of the time the people who are marking your papers know about the subject anyway. So for instance, I've marked medicine papers before because it's the area I feel most confident in, and I feel successful being able to identify answers that are given that do not necessarily feature on the mark scheme. But some of the things that was also discovered, I didn't go for it when I was doing my plan, but they do talk about the problem of infection in surgery not being particularly solved, talking about, for instance, beliefs that were held by the likes of Theodoric of Lucca, who believed in the idea of using wine as a disinfectant. In Hunter's time, surgeons still wore their ordinary clothes. Again, these are less so the Theodoric of Lucca stuff, but we did talk about the way that surgery is carried out. Again, it's not to say that what I've done is wrong, it just means that I've produced something slightly different. What else have they mentioned on here? They talk about anaesthetics, that's cool. And what they talked, this is again something I mentioned in my planning bit as well. They talk about the distinguish between a barber surgeon and those who attend the College of Surgeons as well. But on the whole, that most surgeons were apprenticed in both time periods.
And that's it. I really hope that you found that useful today. It's really good to start building up a catalogue of these model answers and going through the theory and the planning. So I really do hope you'll find them as useful as I feel they are when I'm actually putting them together as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The likes are really helpful because again, it gives me an indication of the kind of content which is working for you guys. You can follow me on Twitter and on Instagram as well. I'm at One History Help, and I'm also there on Facebook too. Just search for One History Help. Thanks for your time today, everybody. Take care. Bye bye.